With me now, Reverend William Barber II. He is the president of Repairers of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. Judith Brown-Dianis is the executive director of the Advancement Project National Office. And LaTosha Brown is co-founder of the Black Voters Matter Fund. I cannot imagine three better people to have this conversation with. LaTosha, I want to start with you because you've just kicked off the Freedom Ride of 2021 to educate people about voting rights. You started in Mississippi, Alabama, and will tour through southern states and finish in Washington, D.C. Tell me, why did this feel necessary, and what is the message you are hoping to deliver?
Thank you for having me. Happy Juneteenth. We wanted to start it out today because of the significance of the holiday. This is a holiday that we didn't wait until it became a national federal holiday, that we have been celebrating this for over 150 years, that our people have literally been celebrating our liberation, but we're also acknowledging, in the spirit of celebrating that liberation, we're also acknowledging that we've still got work to do in this nation. Until all of us are free, none of us are free. And that one of the real components of a democracy is people having free and fair access to the ballot. Currently in 47 states all around this nation, what we're seeing is voter suppression laws, just like my home state of Georgia, where just currently, even yesterday, the Secretary of State is saying that he's going to purge 100,000 voters from the rolls in the state of Georgia. And so more than ever, we need federal legislation that at the very least is going to make sure that we protect the rights of voters in a democracy, that is going to set a standard, a federal standard, which the For the People Act does, for voting rights. And secondly, we need the John Lewis Voter Advancement Act to restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Reverend Barber, as we saw some movement this week from Senator Manchin on voting rights, I thought of you and the March on Manchin, your sense of the role that played in getting the senator to come to the table.
Well, first of all, let me thank you for letting me be on with these two powerful women, both of who are so critical to this work. Listen, Joe Manchin really did move. Some of what he put there was already in the bill. But here's the thing. Voting rights is not just a black issue. It's a black issue. It's a class issue. It's a progress issue. And that's why when we went to West Virginia, 80% of the audience was white, poor white people from the mountains, no matter. We call it from the hood to the holler. That's why on Monday we're having a national poor people's low-wage workers mass assembly, moral march on Washington, launching 365 days to a march on Washington next year. That's why Wednesday, Kentuckians and West Virginians are going to lead us in a march on Manchin and a march on McConnell, because they understand, and Dr. King said this, voting rights is always connected to economic justice. Why is the U.S. Chamber of Commerce applauding Manchin in his stance against voting rights, his stance on the filibuster? So what we have to understand is when you suppress the vote, you also suppress people who would get elected from those votes that would push living wages for the 32 million people who make less than $15 an hour, and health care for the 87 million people who are either uninsured or underinsured, and change for the 140 million poor and low-wealth people. So the fight against voter suppression is not just black, it's class, it's against progress. That's why I don't call it James Crow Esquire, Jim Crow, I call it James Crow Esquire. Because what they are doing will hurt black people, brown people, Native people, Asian people, women, the disabled, and young people. And that's why we all better join this fight to save this democracy and make sure that voting rights are protected.
Yeah, Judith, let's talk about the contours of that fight. Here's how Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell responded to Manchin's proposed changes. Take a listen.
It still turns the Federal Election Commission from a judge into a prosecutor, equally unacceptable, totally inappropriate. All Republicans, I think, will oppose that as well.
So, Judith, you have the Reverend saying what Manchin came out with was the bare minimum, and then you have this type of opposition from the GOP. Where does it go from here?
So, his compromise was dead on arrival, and that is because the Republicans don't want to deal with voting rights. Remember, they are the party of states' rights, and so they do not want the federal government, they don't want Congress in the midst of making laws that would give us federal standards, because instead what they want to do is at the state level have a power grab around our democracy. And so they have absolutely no intention of dealing with Manchin or anyone else. And, Manchin, good for him that he wanted bipartisan, but now we're over that. It's time to keep moving because democracy is on the line. And remember this, Alicia, The Supreme Court's getting ready to rule on a very important voting rights case that could kill the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so now is the time for Congress to act because the House is on fire.
LaTosha, here's what Congressman Jim Clyburn said earlier this morning about Manchin's proposal. Take a listen.
I said the morning of the release that I thought it was a great step in the right direction. I do believe, however, that voting rights, like all other constitutional rights, ought not be subjected to filibusters. Now, this reducing from 60 to 55, that doesn't get it for me. What gets it for me is to remove the filibuster from constitutional issues as we've done for the budget, because I do believe that it's very, very important for us to do that.
LaTosha, I appreciate that the filibuster can be a very wonky issue for people, and yet it ties back to absolutely everything that we've been talking about. As you were on the road, as you were trying to activate voters, is this a part of your message?
Absolutely. You know, most people may not know that in 1963, as part of the March on Washington, one of the pieces that they were calling for is the end of the filibuster, because the filibuster has also been used to actually stop. It was created to stop civil rights legislation. And so we need a stop to that so we can progress in this country. You know, this isn't about, the Constitution doesn't say we bipartisanship or we political parties. The Constitution says we the people. Why in a democracy that claims that it is the greatest democracy in the world are we even in a debate about having free and fair access to the ballot? That we have to know that there have been people who are abusing their power, that are operating in a space that is corrupt and want to use power because they know that they don't represent the majority of people in this country. Even in Manchin's district, in his own community, there are studies that show, there are reports that say almost 70% of people in West Virginia are supporting For the People Act. Why? Because For the People Act is quite centered and not about giving political party power, but literally around giving the people power. And that's why we have to make sure that we're passing and resistant around any other changes. We know that even from the get-go, when this whole notion of bipartisan, you can't be bipartisan when there's a party that has decided that they're just going to be obstructionists.
Well, Judith, this question about why we're talking about it is sort of brought into focus by the fact that today is Juneteenth, the first time it's being recognized as a federal holiday. Talk to us about sort of the split screen we're seeing here, where on one hand, you hear everybody talking about how it's the first time that we're celebrating it as a federal holiday, and on the other hand, we're having these conversations about massive efforts in multiple states at the federal level to restrict voting rights.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say that I think it's important that we say it's okay for people to be conflicted about Juneteenth, because we should celebrate and we should hold up our ancestors that gave their lives for this country, who came here and were considered property and chattel, but who overcame and who resisted. But at the same time, we have to know that freedom has not come, that we are free-ish, and that, in fact, the conflict here and the hypocrisy of giving us the trimmings of freedom without the meat is what we are getting right now. And instead, what we would say is, yes, let's celebrate, but number two, let's get the system right. Let's change it so that all Americans can participate in our democracy.
Free-ish. That is incredibly powerful. LaTosha, I'm going to give you the last word. It seems to me that one of the challenges here is that it's very easy to frame this up as a partisan issue, right? You have Republicans who are attacking the right to vote at the state level, who are resisting reform at the federal level. You have Democrats pushing back. But there are a lot of voters for whom that partisan frame is not going to resonate, right? For them, this has to be a question of morality. This has to be a moral issue. How do you talk about this in a way that doesn't let anybody off the hook and at the same time appeals to a voter who might not be motivated by the partisan frame?
You know, my leader, Dr. Barber, I think that he said it succinctly earlier. You know, the bottom line is we have to really recognize that this is a democracy issue. That at the end of the day, my right to vote should not be contingent upon what political party is in power. That the Constitution does say that we the people, and what we have to do is we have to engage people and educate folks. Those of us, I think that we need people, we need Republicans and Democrats and libertarians and people who don't even claim a party to say, listen, You do not, no political party in this country has the right to undermine access to the ballot. And we have to really recognize that this is an issue around not just civil rights, this is an issue around human rights, that every single human being has a right to literally be able to influence decisions that are being made by their lives and their family lives. This is really an issue around the integrity and the fabric of this nation. Are we going to be a democracy or not? And if we're going to be a democracy, the first thing that we have to make sure that we're protecting is the sacred right to vote.
Reverend Barbara, Judith, and LaTosha, I'm so grateful for all of you. Thank you for your time.